Over the past decades, we've talked of curtailing government spending so that we can then lower the tax burden. Sometimes we've even taken a run at doing that. But there were always those who told us that taxes couldn't be cut until spending was reduced. But you know, we can lecture our children about extravagance until we run out of voice and breath. Or we can cure their extravagance by simply reducing their allowance.
I am not an expert on the U.S. budget, but we cannot spend more than we make.
Amy, we're going to leave it right, Amy. The way we're going to leave it with you, and you can reconsider. We're going to be on for the rest of the show. You're going to think it over for the rest of the show about any government program that you want to stop. But as of now, I've got you down as not opposed to a single government program. And now I'm going to move through the group. In the spotlight tonight, Star of the Beast. Republicans have not always been the party of tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. In ancient times, when they finally got the presidency back after World War II, they were the party of the balanced budget. When Dwight Eisenhower was president in the 1950s, he refused to cut taxes even though the top tax rate was 92%. No one actually paid 92%. They had deductions and other things that brought it down to an effective rate of something much lower. But the actual statutory top tax rate was 92%. But Republican President Eisenhower thought balancing the budget was more important than cutting taxes. At a press conference in 1953, President Eisenhower said, "The fact is, there must be balanced budgets before we are again on a safe and sound system in our economy. That means, to my mind, that we cannot afford to reduce taxes, reduce income, until we have in sight a program of expenditures that shows that the factors of income and of outgo will be balanced." Now that is just, to my mind, sheer necessity. Balancing the budget, to the Republican presidential mind in the 1950s, was sheer necessity. The next Republican presidents, Nixon and Ford, like Eisenhower before them, resisted tax cuts well into the 1970s. Both Nixon and Ford actually supported some tax increases. Then in 1976, the late Jude Wanniski, who I had the pleasure of befriending in his final years, wrote this bit of economic coaching for Republicans in the Wall Street Journal. "The political tension in the marketplace of ideas must be between tax reduction and spending increases. And as long as Republicans have insisted upon balanced budgets, their influence as a party has shriveled, and the budgets have been unbalanced. The political tension in the marketplace of ideas must be between tax reduction and spending increases." Guess which side Jude wanted the Republicans to be on. After President Ford's defeat in his re-election campaign, the Republican Party was wide open to the new ideas driven by thinkers like Jude Wanniski. And so, the idea of starve the beast took hold. The beast, of course, being government, starving it meaning cutting its revenue by cutting taxes. Here's how Alan Greenspan, who had worked for President Ford, described the purpose of tax cuts in a Senate Finance Committee hearing in 1978. Let us remember that the basic purpose of any tax cut program in today's environment is to reduce the momentum of expenditure growth by restraining the amount of revenues available and trust that there is a political limit to deficit spending. Then the most famous presentation of the starve the beast approach came 3 years later from President Reagan, shortly after he was inaugurated in 1981.
Over the past decades, we've talked of curtailing government spending so that we can then lower the tax burden. Sometimes we've even taken a run at doing that. But there were always those who told us that taxes couldn't be cut until spending was reduced. But you know, we can lecture our children about extravagance until we run out of voice and breath, or we can cure their extravagance by simply reducing their allowance.
Simply reducing their allowance. So in the 28 years between the Eisenhower inauguration and the Reagan inauguration, Republican presidents went from balancing the budget and favoring tax increases where necessary to do that, to simply cutting taxes and hoping that the resulting deficits would force cuts in spending. Balancing the budget would no longer be an article of faith for Republicans. Reagan's aura as a tax cutter is so strong that his modern-day fans of the Sean Hannity stripe have no idea that although Reagan talked a good game on tax cuts, he never achieved anything close to tax cut purity. Both as governor of California and as president, Reagan raised taxes. In 1982, he signed into law the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, which included what was then the largest peacetime tax increase in history. But Reagan and the starve the beast Republicans who followed in his footsteps soon discovered that cutting taxes was a lot easier politically than cutting spending. And so the deficits piled up and our debt increased. And now, 30 years after Reagan's inauguration, the starving of the beast is finally working the way Reagan and the Republican authors of that idea had hoped. Our deficits and debt are so enormous now that everyone in Congress and everyone in the liberal Democratic White House believes we must cut spending. And Republicans can confidently declare that tax increases are, in John Boehner's phrase, a non-starter. Never mind that we could solve our fiscal problems by simply allowing tax rates to go back to where they were in the first term of the tax-hating presidency of Ronald Reagan, a period when Republicans thought the tax burden wasn't so bad. When you regard government as the beast that must be starved of revenue, then tax rates can never, ever be too low. And any ground won in that march toward lower and lower tax rates must never, ever be given up. And so John Boehner's and Mitch McConnell's singular task now is simply to keep tax rates out of the political reach of Democrats. As long as the Republicans keep hiding the tax rates ball, the Democrats will only be allowed to play with the spending cuts ball to try to reduce the deficit. And that is why in this, the first 21st century round of the deficit reduction game in Washington, the Republicans have already won. Ronald Reagan never dreamed that the Republicans could initiate a debate and actually vote on a bill that dismantles Medicare and be applauded as serious for doing so. The political question is no longer how much will we cut Medicare. The political question now is, will we dismantle Medicare? Will we repeal it? It was a little over a year ago that Democrats passed the single biggest expansion of Medicaid in its history as part of a health care reform bill that increased health care spending for the population that is not eligible for Medicare. And now, the Democrats' health care fight is about whether they can keep Medicare alive, the most popular health care program the government has ever run. Can Democrats even keep it alive? No Democrat thought they were ever going to have to fight that fight. Not until this year did Democrats notice how well the starve the beast strategy was working. Many of them did not realize how much they had participated in it themselves. Some who voted for the Bush tax cuts, the single most effective starve the beast vote ever cast, are now fighting to save Medicare. Their vote to starve the beast under George W. Bush was easy. But they have by now discovered that saving Medicare will not be so easy.